Hi and welcome to a special edition of the FBU podcast. We had this comment that was posted on the FBU social media recently. It said, when it comes to the firefighting brotherhood and sisterhood, there truly is no borders. And that's certainly true, and the Union's got a proud history of internationalism. We were key in supporting the firefighters who entered Chernobyl and gave them support afterwards. We were supportive, highly supportive of the firefighters in 9/11, both the families of those that lost and also firefighters that were injured in the day. And even very recently, we were supportive and showed solidarity to the firefighters of Hong Kong who had to deal with devastating high-rise fires. So last year, when our annual conference gave us this challenge to raise awareness of the assassination of emergency workers in Gaza and the subsequent attempted cover-up amongst members and trade union partners, it was a challenge that we truly decided to take on. So we did some evidence gathering and we came across this report. It's entitled Israeli Executions of Palestinian Aid Workers, and it's a report by Earshot. And I just want to read you one of the paragraphs in this. It says this: in the early hours of March the 23rd, 2025, Israeli soldiers fired at least 910 rounds in Tel al-Sultan in Gaza. Of these, we determined that at least 789 were fired directly at aid workers. 4 days later, on March the 27th, the body of a Palestinian civil defence ambulance officer was found near the incident site. 7 days later, on March the 30th, the bodies of the other 14 victims, all wearing identifying uniforms or volunteer vests of their respective organisations, and this included firefighters, were recovered from a mass grave alongside the crushed remains of the ambulances and fire truck buried under the soil. Now remember, when it comes to the firefighting brotherhood and sisterhood, as this colleague said, there truly is no borders. So the Fire Brigade Union is taking up this campaign because we demand justice and accountability in regard to this incident. So we're joined today by Dr. Lawrence Abu Hamdan, who's the Director of Investigations at Earshot, the authors of the report, and he's joining us on the podcast to talk about this devastating and sobering incident. So first of all, Lawrence, you're joining us in line. How are you today and where are you joining from?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm joining from my home in London.
Oh, it's good to have you on. And we're also joined by Jess Bernard, who's the trade union organiser for the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, to which the FBU is affiliated and has a long background with. And she's going to speak in the wider political context here in the UK. So Jess, again, how are you and where are you joining us from online?
Hi Tam, thanks for having me. I'm very well, thank you. I'm also joining from London in South London today.
It's a popular place. Okay. Right, Lawrence, if I can start with you, because you're one of the authors of this report. I think, first of all, can you just give us a bit of background about what Earshot does, how it was set up and what the work you actually do?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I just need to issue one small correction, which is this is a report not only by Earshot, but our partners at Forensic Architecture.
Absolutely. And I think Forensic Architecture, they actually did a report in Grenfell as well, I think I'm right in saying that.
They did. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. What we do at Earshot is very specific, but when you hear a case like this, you will realize exactly why an organization like us exists. So what we do is we do sound analysis. We do research on audio for human rights and environmental advocacy. We're the world's first organization like that. We started 3 years ago, and it's built on over a decade of my personal research, but the organization has been going for 3 years. And in that time, we've looked at more than 50 cases where sound plays a really important part in figuring out what happened and being able to reconstruct events. We work with grassroots human rights organizations all over the world. We work with Global media, we regularly do, for example, we verify if sound is deep fake or if it's authentic. That's some of the work we do. We just did a case like that for the CNN. We look at gunfire. We do a lot of audio ballistic work, as this case heavily relied on that. We do, let's say, most recently was this case. Before that, it was a case of shooting unarmed protesters in Tanzania for the BBC. And what we're able to tell from the sound is a lot of details that have been, frankly, silent for too long. It's remarkable that it's taken this long for an organization like us to come around when, if you think about it, half of the incident is just been left on the soundtrack and no one speaking on its behalf.
But it's one of these things, Lawrence, isn't it? That, I mean, a lot of, especially in the 21st century, there's such a reliance on sight, isn't there, on video. But this is about the acoustics, the sound,
exactly,
and what that can tell you. And you're talking specifically about gunfire. We've got a lot of FBU members will have been in the military. There's quite a tradition of people moving from the military into the fire service, and they'll be familiar with the use of sound and the use in the military, the crack and thump, as it's called, the crack of a round passing you, and then you hear the thump of when it's fired, and you can then judge the distance. Is that the sort of architecture
that's a
you
great
use?
place to start, and that's something we work on a lot, actually. The crack and thump, what we call crack and boom, which is basically looking at the difference, the interval of time between a supersonic shockwave and the muzzle blast, right? And using that to figure out how far a shooter is away. It doesn't just tell you how far the shooter is away. If you use it correctly, you can also understand some other things. If you know the ammunition type and all other things, you can work out trajectory of some of that fire as well. Based on those facts, we look a lot at echoes, ground reflections, reflections off walls and buildings to kind of reconstruct where a shooter may have been based on the kind of echoes around the shots. Mm-hmm. That was an important part of this case. We took that to the next level with this case. We can reconstruct the flight path of drones if we have a good recording of that. And understand how that drones are moving relative to the position of a camera. We can, what else do? We enhance recordings, often that's an important part of the work. It's very tedious, but you got to find out what someone said, and it's really deep in the background of a recording. So we do that. And we do also ear witness testimony, which is a series of interview techniques designed at recovering acoustic memories. So, for example, a very famous case I worked on was in 2016, reconstructing a prison based on the detainees' memories of what they heard leaking in through their cell. They never actually got a chance to leave their cell, and they were held in darkness actually most of the time. So sound became a really important way to kind of fight back against sensory deprivation and give some evidence and some testimony about what was going on inside that prison. That prison was called Saydnaya, it was a Syrian regime prison. That was for a case we worked on in 2016. So, we also we do noise pollution studies, looking at how boat noise, for example, affects coral reef life. We look at how wind turbine noise affects a community in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights. So we do all kinds of things where it relates to sound.
No, I think it's important the reason I'm asking that is it's almost like establishing your credentials, because people will be questioning this report because it's clearly a sensitive matter, politically sensitive matter, but you have done reports across the world for different serious agencies. It's clearly a highly detailed report. I mean, I've read the full report. It's incredible work. I mean, just on that, how long did this take you to do? And can you tell our listeners where you got the source information from?
Well, just on that point of credibility as well, I mean, what we've tried to do as an organization, we have worked with all the major institutions, major human rights organizations. We've submitted evidence to courts all over the world and this kind of thing. But we pride ourselves on transparency. You know, we are part of a genre, if you want, of investigators called open source investigation. And open source means you often looking at things that you're finding in the open source, but it also means that you're open and transparent about your methods. So even if we just came along yesterday, we write our reports so that you can backtrack on every move we've made, and we're very honest about how we came to all our conclusions. You know, we don't just want to be an expert that rests on his credentials and says, well, I say this is what happened, so this is what happened. You can go through our report and with the right counter expertise, you know, someone may find a flaw in it, but that's the point, right? We're putting knowledge out there in the world. But that's really important to our philosophy as a not-for-profit organization. That's just on that point. Now, you know, this, as I say, you know, often we're looking at stuff that's in the open source. It's stuff that journalists have got from Telegram or Twitter, and they're sending us to verify or to analyze. But in this case, we were given privileged access to material working directly with the Palestinian Red Crescent. They had some very bad experiences in the media, and they were looking to put their trust in us. We'd worked with them on, or we hadn't worked directly with them through Al Jazeera. We'd worked with them on the killing of Hind Rajab. So if any of your listeners remember this tragic story of a young girl and her family being murdered inside a car, we're the ones who showed from exactly the crack and thump in that incident that the ambulance was that the tank was between 12 and 25 meters away from the children as they fired. So very close range. Would have been able to see exactly what was going on inside, would have likely been able to hear, as we can hear, the anguish of those children.
I think
inside.
I actually saw some of your work on a news outlet in the UK, Channel 4 News, I think, used some of your work to report on that specific incident. Again, another horrifying incident. You
know, when an incident like this happened, and I'll just sort of refresh a little bit, it's really a classic case for a place an organization like us can help, because it happened at night. You see very little. And as soon as the shooting starts, one of the aid workers grabs the phone and he's on it. So you have the incident recorded by sound, but you see almost very little. From the little you can see, remarkably, some details forensic architecture managed to reconstruct. So that's where we step in, and that's why the Palestinian Red Crescent contacted us and reached out to us directly. What we discovered was that contrary to what was written in the media, that there were around 150 shots fired. Because we're a not-for-profit organization and we can dedicate our time to one case like this where we see the importance of it, we showed that there were actually 910 shots fired just in the recordings we have. Right, we assume it's there are actually more. We were given access to the main video, which is filmed by one of the victims. As I said, he's filming as he arrives and as the volley of fire begins.
Just quickly on that, Lawrence, you talk about a video that's filmed. I suppose it begs the question, how did you get hold of that? And this was actually filmed by one of the paramedics, I believe, on his phone, and his phone was actually found in his body several days after when his body was discovered. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the evidence, after the massacre, they were buried in a mass grave and discovered a week later. When they were discovered, they had this phone with him, and his phone was still working, and that video was on there. Without that, we wouldn't have known what was going on. There was a couple of other sound recordings we had when some of the other medics during the incident, as they were under fire, were calling the headquarters, and the headquarters had recorded those dispatch calls. So we had also access to those. Those are much lower quality, but they were also very useful in determining what happened. So for the last, I think, minute and a half, we have 2 overlapping recordings that we managed to sync.
So multiple sources.
Really
it wasn't just a single source. You've got corroborating sources, yeah?
Exactly. And there was 2 survivors, which we spoke to. And actually, that's maybe the thing I'm most proud of with the work, is what we've been able to show is that the survivors' testimony is really the most accurate and reliable documentation of this event. So, we've done all this work, but if you read what they say, it is exactly as it went down. No? Everything we've looked at from every major element, so from the position of the soldiers where they started, the coordinated advance while they were firing, the close range executions, the use of specific kinds of weaponry, it's all corroborated through our audio analysis. And that's really where an organization like us can be most proud, is when we can say, listen to the witnesses, right? Yeah. We've done all this, so you just go and listen to what they have to say.
Yeah, now, in regard to the incident, as I said, I've read the full report, highly detailed. I've also watched, there's a video actually available on this, and we'll put the links to this on the FBU website so everyone can go and watch this. One of the things you said was this happened at night, which does then beg the question, could this have been mistaken identity? These vehicles driving in, it was a conflict zone. So could this, but actually it's pretty clear when you see the video. These are emergency vehicles.
You guys are
flashing
firefighters,
lights.
Right?
Yeah.
So, what does a fire truck look like? It's pretty unmistakable. The lights were on. We can see that as they're approaching, because we have that he's filming unobstructed from the what do you call that?
Windscreen?
The windscreen.
Yeah.
And you can see the vehicles ahead. They've all got their lights on. They're all flashing. And we're talking 40 meters where the first shots were started to fire. You tell me, unobstructed view from a high point looking down, nothing in front of you. Can you see an emergency vehicle 40 meters away?
أول سيارة كانت سيارة صالح يا نور.
أول سيارة صالح.
الإطفائية كانت ثاني سيارة.
Okay, the fire truck was the second one.
تمام.
Okay, سيارتك هي رابع واحدة. أنت كنت برابع سيارة.
I think when you see the video, as everyone who has, it is absolutely clear these are emergency vehicles. They've got flashing lights designating they're on an emergency call. Not only that, there is absolutely no suggestion whatsoever that these crews had any weapons with them. They were there to save life, and yet they got attacked.
Not only were they there to save life, they were there looking for their colleague who had been so that first vehicle was under fire. His colleague was killed. One of the witnesses was actually in that first vehicle, took him out of the vehicle and kept him in the place where they started to fire at his colleagues as they arrived later looking for him. So there was no evidence, in fact, evidence to the contrary that these were exactly aid workers.
And again, Lawrence, just to go to the point of the validity, if I can put it that way, of the evidence, actually the architecture of the geography of the place, because of the way that the attacks had raised the buildings to the ground, this actually assisted you in terms of your acoustic work. Is that correct? Yeah.
Right, exactly. So what happened was we saw that for the first 4 minutes, the gunfire is relatively stable. Now, that means they were in more or less all firing from around about the same place. Where we can show where we can hear the kinetic sound of the bullets and the crack and thump, we can work out, or the kinetic sound of the bullet hitting the ambulances. We could show that they were about 40 meters away when they began firing. Then the other way we could corroborate the position they were in was the echoes from those shots. So you had a really clear echo at around about 550 milliseconds after each of those shots, and that remained stable. So a stable echo, much better than a stable crack and thump, because the crack and thump is gonna change according to trajectory, right? But a stable echo shows that shooters are stationary. So they're there for the first 4 minutes, about 40 meters away on an elevated sandbank. And then that echo starts to change. So we started looking, well, what could be making that echo? What could be producing it? And usually in dense urban environments, that's a very challenging thing to do, because, you imagine right now, just in this room, how my voice is flying around. It's very complicated physics. With a gunshot, it's quite a little bit easier because you get this one very short impulse sound. And what we were looking at was there's really only one wall. There's three structures of hundreds that would have been there before in that area. Three structures remaining. The rest was not only destroyed, like, let's say, rubble, it's razed, they've turned it to dust. There's nothing there. It's not, I think that's what people need to understand when they're erasing parts of Gaza. It's not that it's just a result of the airstrike. The airstrikes come in and then they just clear it. They bring JCBs and the whole land transforms, and you see it in satellite imagery. It's remarkable. So it's not only that there were, if there was also a ton of rubble there, that might have made it acoustically different. It was just three standing walls where hundreds would have been.
And this assisted you to actually work out where the shots were coming from.
The sad thing about that is it actually helped us because it simplified a very otherwise complicated process of echolocation. We found one wall which was around about 100 meters to the south, which can be the only wall that was producing an echo of 550 milliseconds in that whole area. So that was what allowed us to place that wall. The echoes start changing then after about 4 minutes. That echo, the interval between the muzzle blast and the echo, I'm talking in tech terms to the ones who know what I'm referring to, the blast from the gun, not the crack of the bullet, echoing off that rear wall starts to change. It gets longer and longer and longer. The interval increases till it's about 770 milliseconds. Now that means that they were advancing while firing all the way up to the position of the ambulances at about 1 meter per second in that time.
Okay, so just so we're clear, firstly, an ambulance with paramedics on board was effectively ambushed. Afterwards, a convoy of emergency vehicles, 3 ambulances and 1 fire appliance, went in search of them, and again making the point, emergency lights flashing. And then you're saying there was a further, or the evidence shows there was then a further attack. And this lasted a period of time, didn't it? And I think what you're saying is there was an initial attack, but then the troops involved actually started moving closer, still firing. Yeah,
so they fire on the first ambulance that arrives. They take out they kill one of the aid workers, take another one out as a prisoner. The next convoy arrives looking for their colleagues. That convoy has the civil defense, so the fire truck and the other Red Cross aid workers, Red Crescent aid workers. And that then comes under heavy gunfire. So as I said, 910 shots are fired. We could prove that 93% of that gunfire is fired directly at the aid workers, right? I mean, it's probably like 100, but what we can prove is 93%. We can show that there are at least 5 shooters, likely much more, but at least 5 shooters firing simultaneously. I think in one section of, there's a 3-second section where 27 shots are fired in just 3 seconds. So you can imagine how dense that gunfire is directed towards these medics. They then are killed. There's one survivor among them, and then a UN vehicle arrives and also it's hit and killed. So, So as I said, they start 4 minutes, they fire an extremely dense round of gunfire at the aid workers. Then they start advancing, and they advance all the way up to the ambulances now, right? While continuously firing. So that question of whether they could have seen them or not seen them, by now it's totally out the window. They're right up against them. And then we hear a new pattern of echoes. It's like 3 or 2 very fast echoes, each one changing quite rapidly. The only surfaces that can be making these very, very short echoes after the shots, so we're talking, within milliseconds, are the ambulances themselves. Those echoes appear at the same time as we hear the aid workers say they're here, they're with us, and we start to hear the soldiers surrounding them. We hear soldiers' voices for the first time, and we hear them in stereo. Now, why is that important? Stereo effects, so your left and right, are magnified by proximity. So the closer you are to a stereo microphone, the more the stereo effect, like the more you're going to hear left and right. As you're further away, you're going to hear it more. It's not going to be so clear which side it's coming from. So we start to hear. So we know they're very close. We know they're either side of the victims, and then we start hearing this new pattern of echoes, which is rattling off the ambulances. And because we know the relative layout of the ambulances as they were parked, reconstructed by witnesses, but also by the little you could see as they parked and stopped the vehicles before the firing started, we could actually figure out, because of the interval between gunshot and 3 echoes, we could triangulate where those shooters were in and amongst the ambulances. And for one of those shots, we could realize that it happened 1 meter away from Rifat, which is the one guy who was filming. It's the last time we hear his voice. It's the last time we hear him move. So this really signifies close range execution. Just he's on the floor and they just shoot him dead. He's alive. I mean, he's talking till the very end. So they could have arrested him. Yeah.
So just so we are clear, and I can't urge enough for the people listening to this podcast, please go and look at this report. There's also a film that sets out the report. Read it, look at it, take on board the evidence, because it's not just harrowing, it's very shocking as well. Because Lawrence, what your report suggests is that there was a deliberate targeting of clearly marked emergency vehicles, not just initially, but over a period of time. There was absolutely no evidence that these troops were under any fire at all or any threat from these emergency service workers. That your report then shows the troops advancing on the emergency workers. Then, I suppose you could say finally, getting within a metre or a couple of metres and killing them.
يا رب تقبلني وتب علي يما سامحيني يما هذه هي الطريقة اللي اخترتها يما إني أساعد الناس سامحيني يما سامحيني.
Now, for some of these recordings, there's some very, not just evidence gathering points, but some very poignant points. I think, for the firefighters and the other emergency service workers listening to this podcast, there's just some things that really hit home, because one of the crews there, clearly knowing he was about to die, says, "Forgive me, Mother, for the way I chose to help people," followed by gunshots. And I think all of us as firefighters, we understand the dangers of our occupation, but we always work on the basis that when we go to work, we expect to come home. But of the many dangers we face as firefighters, getting attacked by high-velocity rounds, by trained troops, in such a systematic way, is not one of them. So this is clearly a very, no matter the circumstances, this is a shocking report. Now let's go to the aftermath, because this just, again, brings home almost the planned manner of this incident. Can you talk us through the next stage of this incident? What happened afterwards? Some people were captured, the majority were killed. What then happened to these ambulances and the fire engine on the ground, Lawrence?
After the incident, after they've massacred 15 aid workers, they begin to crush the vehicles and bury them with the aid workers in a mass grave, covering it up. And they take the survivors. One of them, there's two survivors, Asad al-Nasasra and Munzir al-Abed. Those are the people we interviewed as well, form a very important part of telling the story. They take them, they take Asad and put him in prison. He's tortured and subject to extreme interrogation, where they continually ask him if he has recordings or who else knew about the incident. Then they take Munzir al-Abed and they use him as like a human shield to basically screen all these people coming into a camp. So they basically kind of enslave him and put him to work for I'm not sure the amount of time before he's released.
These vehicles, you say they were crushed. I mean, there's a description of them from one of the people who discovered it, of the fire truck looking like a crumpled cigarette pack. And indeed, when you see the video of it getting uncovered, that's exactly the description. It fits.
أنا لما شفت الحادث صارت معي يمكن حالة هستيريا. شفت سيارة طفاية المية اللي هذه الكبيرة، شفتها يدوبها مبينة من الجورة من الردم، كأنها زي علبة السجاير أو العلبة تحت العصير هذا مطبقيها الحديد. إنها مطبقة الشحنية الكبيرة. وإسعافاتنا في الجورة يعني بالعافية لما عرفتهم يدوب مبينات.
Basically, what forensic architecture have been able to show is that there was a lot of work on the ground. So where they buried them, there's also berms that are built, so they kind of transformed that whole landscape and turned it into a kind of feeding area into a kind of aid distribution center, what would be later understood as the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, this kind of very suspect humanitarian foundation that was given access, with which there's many leaks now about, you can see online, of the people who were working for that and all the abuses that happened there. But the location of this massacre was very close to one of the first Gaza Humanitarian Foundation distribution points, and actually the road. Basically, they transformed the road and fed that road that the ambulances came on into that area. So there was a whole transformation of that area. There was heavy vehicles and all kinds of stuff that you could use to crush a vehicle, I guess.
And it took because it wasn't just the vehicles that were buried in this pit. It was the bodies of the paramedics and the firefighters as well. How long did it take to discover them? And I understand there was a length of time. Why was there a length of time to discover them?
7 days. I think there was coordination on the ground between the Palestinian Red Crescent and the Palestinian Civil Defense to say, where are our colleagues, what has happened? And eventually the coordinates were given for their mass grave and they were exhumed. It was also a UN vehicle and a UN worker killed. So there would have been pressure from three fronts, three different international organizations.
Okay, so genuinely a shocking and harrowing incident, but a very detailed report. And I think I know one of the things that struck me was watching the sort of video that's been put out alongside the report was that the survivors, all they wanted to be was be believed. And I think the evidence that's been put together, the forensic evidence that's been put together, shows exactly that. They were telling the truth about this incredible, almost unbelievable incident, and yet it happened. I want to bring in now Jess from the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. Jess, clearly a very harrowing incident, but there's a wider context to this, isn't there? And that's decades of occupation. Can you just maybe put a bit more context to this incident? I mean, for us hearing this, it sounds absolutely extraordinary, but I know you've had a lot of experience of these sorts of incidents occurring in this area.
Yeah, thank you, Tam, and thanks to Lawrence for the work that he and his colleagues have been doing at Earshot and Forensic Architecture, bring this to light, and the investigation that they've carried out. We all know that the genocide is being carried out against the people of Palestine. We know over 70,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, but Israel is still denying appropriate access to food, to water, and to shelter to the 2 million Palestinians who are currently displaced within Gaza. Alongside that, though, we're also seeing growing attacks on Palestinians within the West Bank. So raids on villages. We've seen Israeli settlers setting fire to homes with Palestinian people inside those homes, Palestinians being detained and tortured and killed by the Israeli military, and growing land grabs and restriction of movement of Palestinians. You know, just this week, there's been a prevention of children within the West Bank being allowed to walk their journey to school. They're no longer able to take the path that they would take to school, being denied access to their education. Just one example of the kind of growing restrictions on Palestinians. And we've also recently seen the Israeli government introduce the death penalty for use only against Palestinians. And those Palestinians are often charged, found guilty based on confessions which are obtained through the use of torture. So obviously a really, really horrific development in the treatment of Palestinians. Alongside that as well, I think it's important to say, you know, workers in civil society and in partner organisations that we've worked with for a really long time, they do really important work to sort of highlight what Palestinians are being subjected to, the crimes that they're facing. They do that work, you know, to raise that amongst the international community, but they also provide support for Palestinians on the ground. And we're seeing those workers facing an unprecedented level of intimidation and attacks, which are designed basically to make it impossible for them to carry out their jobs. So obviously it's a really dire situation for Palestine, and the demand for us and the international community to act and respond to those calls is growing.
No, and I know the FBU, as I said, we've been closely affiliated with your organisation for a number of years. We've sent a number of our members on delegations into Palestine, although not in recent years because we're simply unable to get access. And they've come back. We've, you know, obviously gone and met the firefighters out there. It's what we do. And they've come back with stories about firefighters in Palestine getting stopped at roadblocks on the way to shouts. And depending on where the incident was taking place, the fire was taking place, depended on whether they would be allowed through that roadblock. I.e., if it was an area that's getting affected primarily with Palestinians, they were delayed at the roadblock. And, you know, as firefighters, we know every second matters when you're responding to a fire. So this was a deliberate attempt. Now, I think for everyone, you know, listening to this, we almost like naively think there must be law. There must be international law that can govern this. Why is it having no impact on the situation that the Palestinian people face?
Well, there is international law, I think, is the important point to take away. And, we know that the Independent Commission of Inquiry, commissioned by the UN, found that Israel was committing a genocide. But I think what we have to understand is that, particularly in Britain, we do play a significant role in supporting Israel to continue committing the international crimes that it does. And so I think that also kind of speaks to why we as trade unionists should also care about this issue. I think we all kind of know about the proud history of trade unionists and international solidarity, but sometimes people will ask, why should I, as a worker in Britain, care about Palestinian, workers? What's it got to do with me? And obviously, you've heard the harrowing account from Lawrence, and absolutely, we should all feel a responsibility to respond to that. But the important part of our role is that we live in a country that directly and indirectly supports those crimes that are being committed. So whether that is through the use of military support, whether that's through diplomatic support or financial support, Britain is tied up in all these different mechanisms. So as trade unionists and workers in this country, the one thing I would say that we have a responsibility to do is organise wherever we can to end that British complicity and support the calls for Palestinians for boycotts and divestments and for sanctions. So that's the kind of call coming directly from the Palestinians. The system that Israel uses against the Palestinians, discrimination, of crimes of apartheid, of genocide, of occupation, that is upheld by Western governments and institutions and companies. So the sooner we can unpick that and challenge that here in Britain, then the sooner we will see the end of those crimes against the Palestinian people, and we will see justice for those workers.
So everyone can do something, in effect. Even if it's the smallest thing of not buying something that you can identify as assisting in the oppression of the Palestinian people. But where can people find this information out, Jess?
Absolutely. So the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign, just a very, very brief sort of history of this campaign, that was called for by the Palestinian-led BDS movement. That was a campaign initiated in 2005. A collection of, I think, 170 Palestinian organizations, including Palestinian trade unionists, came together to make this call. And so, that the call for BDS is inspired by the South African struggle against apartheid. So that's sort of where the campaign comes from. Now, we're PSC are probably best known for the kind of national demonstrations. I imagine lots of the listeners of this podcast have been on those demonstrations. But alongside that, we also support trade unionists, support activists to take part in campaigns for boycott, divestment and sanctions. So you can find out lots of information about those campaigns over on the Palestine Solidarity Campaign website. But like you say, there is something for everyone to do, because we know there are so many institutions involved in the crimes that Israel's committing. So whether that's banks like Barclays, whether that's universities who have investments, local councils who invest their pension funds into companies who supply weapons which are being used against Palestinians. There are so many ways to get involved and to take part in those boycotts and campaign within our own workplaces too.
Just a question on that. There's been a lot of media attention on. The government says it does not support what happened in Gaza, and they offered no practical support to that at all. However, there was a suggestion that the UK was assisting by supplying parts to military jets. I mean, it's very hard to know who to believe in these circumstances. Can you shed some light on that for our listeners?
Yeah, so Britain has been involved in supplying parts of the F-35 fighter jets that we have seen used in Gaza against Palestinian people. And the government sort of has tried to tried to sort of make distinctions about offensive and defensive weaponry, but we know that they have continued to supply arms to Israel throughout the genocide. But alongside that as well, we have seen in Britain growing attacks from the government on the solidarity movement for Palestine. And, you know, something that's working its way through Parliament at the moment is the Crime and Policing Bill, which will give the police unprecedented powers to restrict protests that they deem to have what they call cumulative disruption. So we will likely see the police using these powers to say, you know, that March for Palestine can't go ahead because we deem it to be disruptive in a place where a march happened previously. You know, and we've also seen the prescription of the group Palestine Action and many arrests of mostly retired elderly people holding signs. You know, I think that this is a huge concern it should be a concern to all of us who care about justice, but particularly to trade unionists. It's very worrying that this government would give the police such extensive, unprecedented authoritarian powers. And obviously, in relation to this campaign, I think, you know, this report has exposed one of the most harrowing kind of attacks on emergency workers, where, you know, the Israeli military have committed a war crime. And those aid workers, as we've said, were responding to calls for support, seeking to support their colleagues who've gone missing. And we have to never allow a situation where military forces are permitted to attack and kill and cover up the killing of emergency service workers. Now, we know that the UK were flying kind of surveillance flights over Gaza. We know that those flights took place in the days immediately following the aid worker massacre. And they likely have footage that is relevant to this crime, which could be key to bringing Israel to justice over this issue. So, you know, when the government talks about how it doesn't support these crimes, we need to see them put that into action. So if you don't support these crimes as a government, you need to hand over any evidence that you do have to the ICC, to the ICJ, fully cooperate in the international investigations into these crimes that have been committed, and make sure that Israel is brought to justice and that justice is served for the Palestinian families of the loved ones who were killed in this massacre and to the survivors. So yeah, we alongside Forensic Architecture, Earshot and the British Palestinian Committee are calling for the government to release that surveillance footage and hand it over.
So there's a suggestion that, what's this footage from the RAF or UK aircraft? Where's the surveillance footage come from?
Yeah, so the British government has used RAF jets to carry out surveillance flights across Gaza throughout the genocide.
So this could be vital information because it could be evidence, couldn't it?
Absolutely, which is why it's so essential that is handed over, and any evidence that we have. You know, we know that the government has worked very closely cooperating with Israel throughout. So any intelligence that they have, we call on them to hand that over, because, you know, it's very, very, very easy for the government to say we stand against something, but it's quite telling if they're not prepared to make sure that their actions cooperate with that.
Okay, well, this is something that we have to change.
Just add to that.
Yes, Lawrence.
These RAF flights, what they've been doing consistently, I mean, for whatever reason, stated reason, the government says that they are doing reconnaissance for the Israeli army during a genocide. That's also a huge question mark. I don't think many people know that that's been going on or would support it. I mean, this is our taxpayer money, right? Now, what they've been documenting is also the sheer destruction of civilian infrastructure in Gaza. And that would also be key evidence. They would be in a unique position to show the scale of that. And as I said, in this one incident, where we would have had hundreds of buildings before, we now had 3 remaining, right? So we heard, not only we've been listening to Gaza and the victims of Gaza since the beginning of the genocide, but in this case we heard how Gaza has fundamentally changed. The sound has changed, right? There's no echoes where there once would have been. There's no life where there once would have been, and that is also, even if they don't have something on this specific incident, they've got to cooperate with the ICC now and with the ICJ and show what they've recorded.
Well, I think we've all got the ability, and I think the obligation to do so as firefighters and as members of the Fire Brigade Union. We do understand that the world doesn't stop at the fire station door. And there is a direct connection now between us as members of the Fire Brigade Union and as firefighters to get involved in this campaign. There's clear evidence to show that firefighters and paramedics were targeted and killed, and there's clear evidence to show the manner in which that took place. There's also a suggestion now that the government may have vital evidence. So what we are calling on is for all members to take part in this campaign. We want justice and accountability for our colleagues that were killed in Gaza. We want the evidence to come out, and we want the UK government to play a part in it, and we'll be holding them to account. We are now going to undertake a campaign demanding that all evidence now gets placed before the ICC and the ICJ, and that there's accountability for what there's clear evidence to show is war crimes. We're now calling all FBU members to get involved in this campaign and support us as we do so. And in ending, I just want to say a huge thanks, Lawrence, for you and the work that you've done, and also to Jess for the work that you continue to do in support of everyone in Palestine and the trade unions who are also backing you in that. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody and all the firefighters out there. Always grateful to all of you. So great for having me on. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for having us.